Hi, and welcome to Game of the Years, where I go from the 80s all the way to modern day, choosing my favourite games and also important games which have lasted for years and years to come. So the way I'm going to do it, I've tried to list at least 3 for every year, and then one will go to my final list, and then by the end of that we will go through the top 10 from the 80s, and then I will put them in order to the ones I think are my favourites to the least. The 80s is a very interesting decade for video games, because you sort of add your heyday of the arcade experience, and then sort of going into the console. So when you had things like Ataris, and then you had like the Famicom's, the NES's and stuff like that. And you had the PC market sort of starting to get into serious strength as well. So there was some interesting innovation, and a lot of people using the limited capabilities they had, and made some really interesting games, which some I didn't even realise their first version of a series was in the 80s. So anyway, after this short sort of intro, I'm going to go from 1980 to 1985 in this episode, and then we'll have a quick talk about the video game crash of 1983, which is very important sort of how video games carried on. So we shall get to it with 1980. So 1980. So this was a bit of an interesting year, because there were some iconic games, and but like I said, a lot of the most popular games sort of spawned copies and things like that from previous years. So so there was a lot of like the arcade games, but sometimes there was a lot of knockoffs and copies. So on this list, I've tried to put the ones that I've played the most, or has had the most sort of impact for me. But there is some years where there is some games that I might not have played at the time, but played at later times, so don't have as many impact for me. So let's get into so 1980. My number 3 is a bit of a cop out, but it's the Game & Watch, which was a very interesting, I think it was like one of the first forays into, portable gaming. Basically, it was very basic with the graphics, and there was this weird game with this clown, and you're juggling balls from one end to another. But at the time, there were so many people who had one of these Game & Watches, and I wish we bloody kept them all, because they're worth quite a bit now. Well, a lot more. So that was very fascinating, and the fact that they have recently brought back the Game & Watch as a sort of like anniversary. So even Nintendo have sort of shown how important it was. And I'm not saying you wouldn't have had the Game Boy and stuff if you didn't have this attempt beforehand, but I think it is a natural progression of how they, tried the market and seen how these, this little, unit with, I think it only had one game or two, can't remember, but yeah, I think it only had this one game with the juggler. But yeah, so you know, and it's interesting how they progressed and become basically you know, dominant in the handheld games market. So yeah, anyway, go a bit quicker. So number 2 is Missile Command. This one, like I said, I missed it when I was a kid. I think I played little bits here and then, but I don't think I had like the impact of, like, you know, the arcade or sort of playing it a lot. You know, there was some like Atari games which I played more. So yeah, so that one has to be number 2 because it is, you know, a very fast-paced, sort of very interesting game, and you know, deserves to be on a list. And number 1 has to be Pac-Man. If you're on about influential games which has become timeless, and you know, there's still re-releases and new games of the Pac-Man series. It's an iconic character which is used in, you know, being popped up in TVs and movies and things like that. So it's still a very popular, you know, character. And you know, and like I said, when you think this was released in 1980, it's been a timeless series. And also, I love the thing in Scott Pilgrim, which is actually true, that the original game was called Puckman, but they was worried that they're going to scratch off the P and turn it into an F. So, you know, take that as it is. But yeah, so that is 1980. I will go straight into 1981. Number 3 for me is Gallagher. Same thing. I missed playing this because I don't know why, but I think it's because we only had a limited amount of games, so we played things like Millipede, Centipede, and things like that, Space Invaders. But Gallagher was, you know, one I never played in the arcade, and I only played later. But I can see why it's, you know, got a cult status now, because you know, it's so much faster paced than like Space Invaders, even though that was impactful, and you know, and the fact that I've got like faster, the fewer things on the screen, you know, and it's like and that was actually, you know, a happy accident. So yeah, Gallagher had to be number 3. Number 2, just very simple game, and I still love it, and it's still frustrating as hell, and that's Frogger. Such a simple concept, you know, Frog trying to get over different obstacles, but it was one of those things, like I said, the more gradually it got higher, you know, harder and harder and quicker, you wanted to carry on and carry on. I've got a sort of like an arcade machine. Well, like I bought the unit and then I did a DIY job, and basically I've got a twin stick arcade unit with emulators on. So I've been playing a good deal of them. Not all of them are on there, but yeah, I managed to play a bit of Frogger, and my number 1 for this year of 1981, which is Donkey Kong. Same thing, if you talk about iconic games which sort of launched launched a plethora of, you know, characters and things like that. You know, you had your first introduction of Mario, which was called Jumpman. That was it. And of course, you know, Donkey Kong. And also spawned different variations, and then, you know, it's still a character, and you know, is part of the Mario world and Mario series, you know, forever and ever now. So that is 1981. So I will go straight into 1982. I'm probably going to take a break after this, and then I'll carry on. So 1982, I was looking, and there was a few games which, same thing, never sort of interest me, and didn't really play much of it, like Cuba. So I'd say number 2, I'm going to move it. Number 2, I'm going to put Miss Pac-Man, because they just basically put a bow on it, but it's still, really, really interesting game, and I can't remember if they actually, improved, graphically or anything like that, but it was still very popular in the arcade machines, and it's still, really fun. And number 2 now, I will put, even though I don't think I've actually played it, the fact that I didn't even realise this series started in 1982, and in later years, me and my brother and my friend, I think we played a ton of this, and that's Microsoft Flight Sim. And when you think of, like, nowadays, on like the on the Game Pass, it's like these newer ones, it's amazing how graphically and how things have progressed over years and years, that you've got absolutely amazing graphical fidelity and sort of accuracy, and it started in 1982, which I think is quite amazing. And number 1 for me is Pole Position, which is basically a Grand Prix, Formula 1 type game, and it still sounds and looks awesome. Like I said, I've always been a big fan of things like Formula 1, but and also, like I said, I've always liked driving games, especially these sort of early ones. They just seem to be very timeless, and even though they might have like some irritating sounds, when the engine's running, that was the limitations of the units and stuff, but it's still really great. So number 1 for 1982 is Pole Position. I will also list the number 1s for the other ones I've done. So number 1 for 1981 is Donkey Kong, and number 1 for 1980, of course, is Pac-Man. So we'll take a short break, and then we'll do 83, 84 and 85. Right, so we'll start on 1983. Firstly, I think we're going to mention the video games industry collapse of 1983, because before, I think they said that before the crash in 1983, it was sort of like a $3 billion industry, and I think they're selling it by 1985 it was sort of like 200,000. So it's like a 95% collapse of the entire console, and also the golden age of arcade gaming and things like that, which started this home console buzz as well. So basically, got a stat. Yeah, the sales in 1984 in America fell 800 million, which is 2.1 billion in modern day for inflation. So basically, and that is like one of the main countries at the time for console gaming. Of course, you'd had Japan and then America. So I've just had a bit of a read up, and one of the major things was the failure of Atari, but it wasn't all on them. There was like a lot of market saturation, so things were being, all these new consoles and games and stuff were being absolutely bombarded, and the quality on most of them was quite poor as well. So basically you had, you know, a diluted sort of system. And also this was the time when sort of PC was being more popular and things like that, and seemed to be a lot, you know, better quality stuff and things like that. So there was more a disregard for console gaming, because most of the games were very poor, and they were just like massively rushed out. I mean, the famous doomed ET game, which one person was working on, you know, for I think it was 8 or 9 weeks, and that's all they had, to basically make a video game from scratch. So and this was a sort of like the rock star, you know, nothing can go wrong sort of video game development, which is very different now. There's still these rock stars and these sort of mavericks and lunatics who well, that's for a different episode. But yeah, so just to put into context of how big this crash was, and how it took a very long time for it to get back to anywhere it used to. I mean, you had like the popularity of like Nintendo, you know, with the NES and the SNES, but to get back to, you know, the boom it was, it did take a long time. So that was the important thing, because these sort of games and everything around it, you know, was especially when sort of when Nintendo started to flex their muscles afterwards, and they sort of started doing the bedrocks of you know, game series we still play to this day, and you know, innovating and things like that. So, you know, even though the market had collapsed and it wasn't the same as it was with the heyday of arcade and you know, consoles, but you know, it still was chugging along, just at a, you know, a smaller state than it was, but it was enough to get it back up and running, even though it was, you know, these industries which fail, it takes a long time to recover. And yeah, so anyway, after that 5-minute explanation, we'll go on to the games of 1983. Number 3 is one, I don't know if I've played the very, very first one, but it was an iconic series, and you've got to sort of give that props, and that's Bomberman. Especially when I was growing up on the sort of like the SNES versions and things like that. It was it was so much fun, and also, you know, you could play with your friends and things like that, and yeah, it was fast paced, silly, and it, you know, and it was so much fun, and yeah, this game series has had ups and downs, but you know, the original sort of style and format, I think, still is timeless. So yeah, so that's my number 3. My number 2 is the original Star Wars game, but a specific version, because you had the normal arcade machine, but you also had the cockpit version. And I remember sort of, you know, going to like Skeg and that, and find, you know, because I think when I was sort of a kid, you know, this was sort of like sort of late 80s to early 90s, so it was sort of, you know, years after, you know, its heyday. So there was only a few places which you could find these, and I think I wish we had like money when we were a kid, because I remember when these like arcades were shutting down, and they were like, you know, charging small amounts for like you know, these iconic you know, cabinets, and when you think like, you know, these sort of like the Star Wars one with the cockpit and things like that, I think it's like thousands now, and it's like, yeah, I would to have money back then. But yeah, so I've always loved that cockpit one, and it just, yeah, it was like, as a kid, the closest you could get to recreating, you know, the trench run from the first Star Wars. And even though it was quite a tricky game, and I didn't really get far, I used to play it again and again and again, and yeah, and that'll always be a great game to me. Even though, you know, it might not look great nowadays, but you know, but with sort of childhood imagination and sort of being able to recreate a scene from a movie you've seen lots and lots of times, that was like, you know, groundbreaking for me. So yeah, and number one for 1983 is Mario Bros. Same thing, it was a very simple sort of setup, but I've just played part of it on an emulator, and it's still got, you know, the basic characters, the Koopas and things like that, you know, and it, you know, is just like set on one thing, so it is very basic, but the groundworks is, you know, from what they turned in a couple of years' time, you know, the sort of the framework of what they were going to do and how successful they were going to be was there. So same thing, very iconic and important game. So yeah, so that is 1983. 1984, there's a few games I wanted to put on. 1942, which is one of my brother's favourites, and is still really interesting to this day. Sort of like a, you know, a variation of, I think, the Battle of Midway or something like that. But yeah, this, like, you know, big sort of planes and sort of you know, but it was an arcade sort of, like, you know, shooter sort of, you know, going from the bottom upwards. Is it isometric? I forget. But anyway, and sort of like, you know, one of these little classic sort of like Japanese, you know, shooters of the time. You know, they're either side scrolling, you know, left to right or bottom to top, and shooting all the enemies as you go on, and it's still timeless. There's other ones which I need to add to it, so like Punch Out, same thing. I don't think I played it when I was younger, so it sort of missed me. My number 3, which is a game I've played lots and lots of times, same thing, not very good at it, but it was simple, it was fun, and it was very addictive. Marble Madness. That was also, you know, it was always really fun, and was, with the timer and stuff, was really sort of challenging as well, and different things moving about and things like that. So yeah, that's my number 3. Number 2 is a classic called Kung Fu Master. Same thing, you had like hordes of enemies and you could punch and kick, and yeah, and they threw knives at you and stuff like that, and it was simple, but it was really fun. And I've just I played a bit of it earlier on, and I've got to admit I went back to having fun. I was getting mullered, but I was still having fun. And number one for 1984 has to be the original Tetris. Same thing, even though it was basic, it changed, puzzle gaming from there onwards, and became a massive, cultural landmark, even though it was owned by Russia. Well, Soviet state at the time, which is, was a very long running thing. But yeah, so that is 1984. I know this is a long episode, I do apologise. So I'll go straight into 1985, which is, I think there's 3 iconic games, and still play both of them, well, all 3 of them today, and they're still, still timeless. So number 3 is Paperboy. I've never been good at it, and it's even harder on a on a proper joystick, arcade joystick. So so there was plenty of paper through windows, but that was the same thing. Very challenging game. I don't think I ever got past like level 2 or whatever, because the difficulty curve was stupid, especially on the consoles. But I still love it. And my number 2 is another one which is still a hell of a lot of fun to play, and that's Space Harrier. My brother has never liked it because he just thinks it's a bit too much, but I remember the same thing. I must have a thing for like arcade cabinets with cockpits, because I remember this like classic cockpit, and it was just like such a fun game, and same thing, was so bloody challenging, but I loved every minute of it. And I would put it as number 1, but I've got to put Super Mario Brothers. Same thing, progression of what Mario Brothers did, but was a game changer, and literally I think it sort of, even though this was sort of only when gaming was still recovering from the massive hits, this is the things which started to resurrect it slowly but surely. And like I said, and nowadays the iconic sort of Mario look and the gameplay and everything around it was solidified in this one game. It's still timeless, and still a lot of fun, challenging as hell, but still a lot of fun. So this is my first half. I'm glad I did put it in 2 halves, because I had a feeling I'd go on and on a bit. So if you got to the end, well done. So that is my 1980 to 85. I will go through my number 1s. So we have Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Pole Position, Mario Bros, Tetris, and Super Mario Bros. So come back for part 2, hopefully, if this hasn't bored you to tears, and I'll let you know how it goes. Bye.